Good day. I am Michael M. Ramos Jr., student of Master of Engineering, major in Computer Engineering, and I'll be demonstrating what's in the data entry methods of relative coordinates. So this is the AutoCAD application number 6 from the discussion of Dr. Edwin R. Arboleda. So what's in the relative coordinates? As you can see, so we have here the horizontal and vertical directions in the AutoCAD. So when it comes to the relative coordinates, we will identify the difference within the x and y axis. So to declare or to input the relative coordinates in our objects pertaining especially to the lines, so we must indicate in the command the at symbol, then the value of the change in x, comma, the value of change in y. So for example, if we will create a horizontal line or we will create a sum or an object within the horizontal direction, so we must include or we must indicate the value of our change in x-axis while the value of our y-axis is in 0. So for example, from point 1 to point 2, we have here a distance or relative difference of 5. So from point 1 to point 2, so we will declare a value of 5 for the change in x-axis. Okay? So we have here the at symbol, then the change of x would be 5. Then this is a horizontal line, so our value for the change in y will remain 0. So please take note that when it comes to horizontal direction, if our point is going to the right, the value of our horizontal or the relative coordinate in x-axis should be positive. While if we will pertain from point 2 to point 1, as you can see in this presentation, we have here the difference of 5, but the direction is from this point to the left, so we must indicate our change in x-axis into negative. Positive to the right, negative to the left. So to draw this line to the right, point 1 to point 2, we must declare at 5, comma 0. While if we will draw a line from point 2 to point 1, we must declare at negative 5, comma 0. So same application should be applied in the vertical direction or applying the y-axis. Okay? So our change in y would be positive or negative and our x should remain in 0. So for example, if I have here a line with a distance or direction, vertical direction of 5, so if I will draw it from point 1 to point 2, so we have here our origin peak from point 1 and we will declare at 0, comma 5. So if we will declare a line starting from this point upward, so the value of our change in y should be positive. Now, if we would declare a line from point 2 down to point 1, so if we will draw a line downward, so we should declare a negative value of y. Okay? So it must be point 2 to point 1 at 0, comma, negative 5. So to apply these relative coordinates, so we should use the examples pertained in video number 5. So as you recall, on our video number 5 about the absolute coordinate, so we use this diagram or use this symbol or object from point 1, point 2, point 3, point 4, and point 5. So based on the absolute coordinates, we use the points, but in this activity, in this application, in our video number 6, so we should use the relative coordinates, the change in x and also change in our y. So let's go to our AutoCAD. So as you can see, this is our template used in application number 5. So we have here the previous diagrams applied by the absolute coordinates. The first example, we have here the activity 1, which is the symbol of H. We have here the activity 2 or the figure 2, and we have here the figure activity number 3. So let's apply the concept of what we call relative coordinates, the change of x and also the change of y. So let's use first this first diagram. So as you can see, we indicated the point of value here, our starting point as 1 comma 1. So to create another symbol or another object, so let's type L in our command or type line. And after typing line, we should declare a specific point. So let's say I'll declare my first point as we have here the value of x-axis of 1, comma, and we have here the height, for example, 15. Okay, so let's undo 1 line L 1 comma 10. So we have here the starting point of our line starting from point 1 comma 10 x1, and we have here the y-axis which is 10. So based on our figure, we have here point 1 to point 2. So from point 1, we have here the value of 1, and point 4, we have here the value of 4. So let's take the distance from point 1 to point 2, from 1 to 4. Based on our figure, we have here a distance of 3. So this line is going to the right, so we should declare the change of x in positive. Okay? So to declare this point, so let's type in our command the formula for change of x and y. So relative coordinate is at change of x comma change of y. So let's declare at, so the distance or horizontal distance is positive 3, comma, there is no change in y-axis, so let's declare 0. Then hit enter. Okay? Then next one. So we have here point 2 to point 3. So we have here a horizontal distance of 1, 4 to 5. Okay, to the right. And we have here from point 2 to point 3, we have here horizontal or vertical distance rather of 1 to 2, which is 1. So it is vertical upward motion, so this would be also positive. So let's type in our command line at 1 comma 1. So we have here the line from point 2 to point 3. Okay, so let's go back to our diagram. So in this example diagram, point 3 to point 4, we have here a horizontal or vertical distance of 2. So this distance from point 3 to point 4 is going upward. So let's declare the value of our change in y into 2, and the change of x would be 0. So in our command line, let's type at 0 comma 2. Then we have here the line from point 3 to point 4. Now, for our point 5, we have here a distance of 4. But as you can see, point 4 to point 5 is in left direction, going left. So for this one, our change in x would be negative because from point 4 to point 5, it is to the left, while the change of y is retained to 0. So for this, we should declare at negative 4 based on our horizontal distance, comma 0. And click enter. And for the final, from point 5 back to point 1, we could type close, or let's say we have here the distance from 4 to 1. So 4 minus 1, we have here the 3. Okay? And point 5 to point 1 is going down. Okay? A downward. So vertical. So we have here the change in x at 0. And we have here change of y, which is equivalent to negative 3. So let's type at 0, comma, negative 3. Then, as you can see, if we will zoom it in, the point 1, okay, the starting point and the point 1 on the ending point meets. So let's click enter or hit escape. So based on this diagram, we have the same diagram on our video number 5, following the relative coordinates. Okay? Video 5, absolute coordinates. Video 6, relative coordinates. Now, let's apply the relative coordinates of our exercise number 1, which is the figure number 1, letter H. So, let's say if this is 1, comma 10. So, let's say, let's hit line, and let's declare the specified point would be 7, comma 1. Or no, 7, comma 10. Okay. So, based on this, we should draw by applying the relative coordinates of this figure H. So this would be easy because the relative coordinates or relative distance for each diagram would be the same as 1. So let's try. So from point A to point B, we have here horizontal distance of 1. Then there is no change in y. So if this is going to the right, so we must declare at 1 comma 0. Now, the distance between point B and point C is the same also, 1, and it is going upward, so the value of change in y would be positive, but the change of x would retain to 0. So we must declare at 0, comma 1. Next one, point C to point D, it has a horizontal distance of 1, and point C to point D is going to the right, so it is positive. For the vertical one or the change in y, it must be retained to 0. So let's declare at 1, comma 0. Next one, we have here point D to point E with a vertical distance of 1, and point D to point E, the drawing of the line is downward motion. So at this point, we must declare our change in y by -1, and our horizontal or the change in x must be 0. So at 0, comma, -1. So next one, we have here point E to point F. So the horizontal distance of point E to point F is 1, and point E to point F is going right. So let's declare our change in x-axis with 1, and our change in y-axis is 0. Retain, there's no change in the vertical. Next one. So point for point F to point G, we have here a vertical distance of 3 ones. So this must be 1 plus 1 plus 1 equals to 3. So the point F to point G is going up, okay, upward. So automatically our change in y would be positive. Our change in x would retain 0. So let's declare at 0, comma 3. Okay. Next one, from point G to point H, we have here a horizontal distance of 1. Point G to point H is going to the left, so our change in x value is negative. Our change in y or the vertical value should retain to be 0. So let's type at -1, comma 0 and hit enter. Let's undo because I think I've declared at -1.0. So let's type again at -1, comma 0 and hit enter. Okay. Again, from point H to point I, we have here vertical distance of 1. Point H to point I is going down, so automatically our change of y is negative. So we have here change of y is -1. Our change in x would be retained to 0. So let's type at 0, comma -1. Next one, we have here point I to point J with a horizontal distance of 1. And as you can see, our point I to point J is going to the left. So automatically, our change of x would be negative. Our change of y, so there is no change in our vertical distance. So automatically, our y would be 0. So we have here at -1, comma 0 and hit enter. Next one, we have here point J to point K. So the vertical distance for or horizontal distance for point J to point K is as is 0. There is no change in x. While on the change of y, we have here 1 vertical distance. Point J to point K is going up. Automatically, our change of y would be positive. So let's declare at 0, comma 1. Point K to point L. So when it comes to the change of hex, our horizontal distance would be 1. Point K to point L is going left, so automatically our change in x would be negative. When it comes to the change of y, the vertical distance, there is no change, so automatically our change of y would be 0. So let's declare at -1, comma 0. And for the last point, to close this figure number 1, the vertical distance of L and A would be 3, the same as the vertical distance of G and F. When it comes to our horizontal or the change in x, it will be retained to 0. So point L to point A is going down, so automatically our change of y would be negative. So in here, let's try to type at 0, no change in x, comma, -3 going down. And we have here our figure number 1, which is letter H, and click enter. So based on our video number 5, we have here the same figure. Now, for the application of our figure 2, so let's apply our relative coordinates in this figure. So let's see if we have the same output, the same result from the figure or from the video number 5. Okay, so let's go back to our AutoCAD. So let's say that if we will create the figure number 2, so let's type L for line. Then let's say, let's declare the starting point of this to be 10, comma 10. I think I inputted the starting point of our H. So let's escape. L 15, comma 10. I think escape L 12, comma 10. Okay, so we have here a matching point or parallel within the video number 5. So at this point, so we have here figure number 2 with some horizontal and vertical distance of 1 to 1.5. Okay, so for our figure number 2, let's start from point A to point B. So we have here a horizontal distance of 1, vertical distance of 0. So we have here at, automatically our change in x would be positive because it is going to the left or going to the right rather. So at 1, comma 0. So next one, we have your point B to point C. It has a vertical distance of 1. So our change of x would be 0. Our change of y would be 1. Positive 1 because point B to point C is positive. So we have here at 0, comma 1. Next, we have here point C to point D. Horizontal distance of point C to point D is 1. Positive going to the right. Then when it comes to the vertical, distance is 1. Point C to point D is going down. So we have here the change in y-axis negative 1. So let's declare at 1, comma negative 1. Okay. Next, we have here point D to point E. When it comes to the x-axis, there is no change. So change in x is 0. When it comes to the vertical, 1. Change in y, we have here 1 difference. Okay. And point D to point E is going down. So we have here change of y, which is equivalent to negative 1. So let's declare at 0, comma negative 1. Next one, from point E to point F. Point E to point F has horizontal distance of 2. And the change of this is 2. So we have here positive 2 for change of x because it's going to the right. When it comes to the change of y, the vertical, there is no change. So we should declare the value of 0. So let's type at 2, comma 0. I think I entered a wrong input again. So I think I inputted 2.0. So let's declare at 2, comma 0 and hit enter. Next one. We have here point F to point G. Point F to point G has a horizontal distance of 20. So it is going to the right. So our change in x would be positive 2. When it comes to the vertical distance, the point F to point G has a vertical distance of 1 plus 1, which is equals to 2. Point F to point G is going up, so our change in y-axis should be positive 2. So our command line to must be declared must be 2, comma 2. Okay? So next, we have here point G to point F. Point G to point G to point H. Point G to point H has a horizontal distance of 0. So there is no change in x. When it comes to the vertical distance, it has a distance of 1.5. Point G to point H is going up, so our change in y would be positive 1.5. So let's declare at 0, comma 1.5. So let's span. So next, point H to point I. Point H to point I has an horizontal distance of 2. And as you can see, point H to point I is going to the left. So based to the left, automatically our change in x-axis would be negative 2.0. Now, for the change in y or the vertical distance, so it will be 0 because there is no change. So automatically, let's type at negative 2, comma 0. I think I inputted negative 2.0 at negative 2, comma 0. and hit enter. Next one, we have here point I to point J. Point I to point J has a vertical distance of 1. Okay? Horizontal distance is 0, so our change of x would be 0. But when it comes to the change of y, we have here positive 1 because I to j is going up. So let's type at 0, comma 1. Next, point J to point K. Point J to point K has a horizontal distance of 1. Okay? And the change of x would be negative because point J to point K is going to the left. When it comes to the change of y or the vertical axis, there is no difference. So automatically our y would be 0. So the change of J to K would be at negative 1, comma 0. Next one, point K to point L. Point K has a horizontal distance of 2. And K to L or point K to L is going to the left, so automatically our change of x would be negative 2. When it comes to the change of y, the difference between K to L is 1 and it is going down, so our y value or the difference in y-axis would be negative 1. So let's declare in the command line at negative 2, comma negative 1. Okay? Point L to point M. Point L to point M has a horizontal distance of 1. Point L to point M is going to the left, so automatically our change of x would be 1. When it comes to the change of y or the vertical distance, there is no difference, so as is, our y value would be 0. So let's type at negative 1, comma 0. And for the last one, we have here the distance from point M to point A. Point M to point A has a vertical distance of 1.5 plus 1. So automatically, we have here vertical distance of 2.5. Going back to our change in x, there is no difference between the horizontal distance of point M to point A. So we will declare 0. But when it comes to the vertical distance or change of y, we must declare negative 2.5 because M to A is going downward. So automatically, let's declare at 0, comma, negative 2.5 and hit enter. So as you can see, we hit our first point, which is the point A. Let's hit escape or enter. So we have here this diagram, which is the same from our previous diagram in, sorry, I think, okay. So I think I misinterpreted or drawn the first diagram. So we have here this diagram, point A to point B. Okay. So this is the diagram of our video number 6. So this is point A, point B, point C, point D. Okay. So this is the figure of number 2. I think I've drawn a wrong in this one. Okay. As a basis. So this is the correct figure of our figure number 2. So now, let's start to draw our figure number 3, applying the relative coordinates. So let's type L for our line, and automatically, let's say that we should start our point on 20, 10. Okay? So based on this, we have here the same starting point with the previous figure. So here, in figure number 3, we have here point A to point B with a reference distance of 2, horizontal distance of 2. So it is going to the right, so it must be positive. So our change of x would be positive 2. When it comes to the change of y, there is no difference, so as is, our change of y would be 0. So let's type at 2, 0. Next one, we have here point B to point C. Point B to point C has a horizontal distance of 0. So our change of x should be declared as 0. When it comes to the vertical or the y-axis, point B to point C has a vertical distance of 3. Point B to point C is going upward, so automatically our change of y would be positive 3. So let's type at 0, 3. Hit enter. Next, point C to point D. Point C to point D has a horizontal distance of 1. Point C to point D is going to the right, so automatically our change of x would be 1. When it comes to the y-axis, there is no difference, so there is no change in y, so automatically our value would be 0. So let's declare at 1, 0. Next one, we have here point D to point E. Point D to point E has a horizontal distance of 2. Okay? Point D to point E is going to the left, so automatically our change of x-axis would be negative 2. When it comes to the y-axis, point D to point E has a vertical distance of 2.0. Point D to point E is going upward, so automatically our change of y would be positive 2. So in our command line, let's type at negative 2 for the x, comma 2 for the y. Next one, we have here point E to point F. Point E to point F has a horizontal distance of 2 also. So we have here point E is the half of 2 points. So we have here 1 plus 1, we have here 2. So point E to point F is just an identical point between point G or point D to point E. So point E to point F has a horizontal distance of 2 and it is going to the left, so our change of x-axis would be negative 2. When it comes to the vertical distance, we have here 2 also, and point E to point F is going down, so automatically our change of y-axis would be negative 2. So we must declare in our command line the value at negative 2 comma negative 2 and hit enter. Next, we have here point F to point G. Point F to point G has a horizontal distance of 1. Point F to point G is going to the right, so automatically our horizontal or the change in x-axis would be positive 1. When it comes to the vertical distance or change in y, there is no change, so automatically our y-axis would be 0. So let's declare at 1 comma 0 and hit enter. Then for the last point, we have here point G back to point A. Point G to point A has a horizontal distance of 0. So our change of axis would be 0. For our vertical distance, point G to point A has a vertical distance of 3. Point G to point A is going down, so automatically our change in y would be negative. So our x value would be 0 and our y value would be negative 3. So let's declare at 0 comma negative 3. Okay? We can type close or we could type our distance, okay? The relative coordinates of this figure and hit enter. And as you can see, we have here the same symbol of an arrow. So when it comes to relative coordinates, so as you can see, we should input, okay, the change of x and change of y of our figure. So to identify the change of x, we should see the difference between the points and also the direction. So if it's going to the right, it would be positive. If it is going to the left, it would be negative. When it comes to the y-axis, so to assess if our line should be positive or negative, if in the y-axis, the point is going upward, automatically our change in y would be positive. While if our point is going downward, so we should declare our value and the change of y to be negative. So our declaration for the relative coordinates must be at the change in x, comma, change in y. So I hope you like this video and I hope you learn about the relative coordinates. So please like and subscribe in my channel. So in my channel where we apply what we learned from the academe. Thank you so much. Have a great day and stay safe.